Hi, my name is Reggie Williams, and I'm one of the executive directors of Black Film Space. Black Film Space is a nonprofit organization dedicated to supporting the careers of Black filmmakers. We host workshops, panels, and other community-building events that are designed to support Black content creators. We also have a membership program that offers discounts to filmmaking resources, free events, a filmmaking database, grants, a mentorship program, and much more. In the next episode of the Black Film Space podcast, we talk with Terri Francis, the director of the Black Film Center Archive at Indiana University and the author of the book Josephine Baker's Cinematic Prism. Terri's book examines aspects of Baker's career, deepening the ongoing conversation about race, gender, and performance in the African Diaspora. We talk with Terri about her writing process, Josephine Baker's time as a movie star, and much more. This episode was executive produced by Reggie Williams and Sino Gibson and edited by Elon Pita. And now, on to our interview. All right, Terri, welcome to the Black Film Space podcast. How are you today?
I'm very excited and curious to be here.
Awesome. What are you curious about?
I'm curious about what are we going to talk about, and I'm curious what is going to come out of my mouth, how the question, what the questions are going to be, and what how the vibe will develop, and then I'm curious about the finished product. Will there be additional music? Will there be, I'm just excited. I'm really happy to be here. Thank you.
Awesome.
For the invitation.
I'm excited that you're excited, and I'm also excited that you're here. And we're just gonna jump into it. So right now, you currently work at the Black Film Center Archive.
That's right.
How long have you been out there, and how'd you get involved?
Yeah, so so the Black Film Center Archive is now part of the media school at Indiana University. I've been a professor at Indiana University since 2014, and I assumed the directorship in 2017. So I guess I'm going on 4 years doing that. And the Center Archive has existed for 40 years. This year is our 40th anniversary.
Wow.
Yeah. It was founded in the 80s, in 81 by an English and Afro-American Studies professor, Phyllis Klopman.
Dope. And what is the Black Film Center Archive exactly?
It is a center and an archive, in that we preserve the kind of film and motion picture heritage of people of African descent in the U.S., in continental, in Africa, Europe, the Caribbean, just all around the world. So we are an historical repository and a research center, and we are also, we also do programming. So we collect, conserve, and we also share with our communities in Bloomington. We host classes, and yes. Yeah.
Okay, dope. And are there lots of Black Film Center archives like the one that you're a director of, at universities all over, or is it kind of like a niche thing?
No, it's a niche thing.
Yeah.
It's unique. We're the first academic repository to be completely dedicated to Black film. And we're still that way. The landscape has certainly changed with the Smithsonian. The Blacksonian in DC has a motion picture unit within it, and that hosts and houses a number of different collections. But even though it's a museum with a public face, because we're a public university and just a university in general, our mission is to be accessible.
Yeah.
and to be open to researchers. And then we have absorbed an important collection called the Black Filmmakers Hall of Fame collection. That was under the previous director, Michael Martin, and the archivist, Brian Graney. They brought in this collection from Oakland. The Black Filmmakers Hall of Fame has like artifacts and memorabilia, as well as papers, photographs, and audiovisual material. So it's a big, it's a large collection, or large collection of collections, and it remains unique, even though the landscape of Black film research and historic preservation has changed.
Mm. Sounds so dope. I definitely need to get out there and check it out.
Yes. Oh, that would be amazing. We could do a walkthrough and like a podcast from the Center Archive.
Oh, we're already ready for the episode, the follow-up episode?
Yes. I can see it. It's going to happen. Yeah.
So why did you choose this career path of research, writing, curating? Like, why this in regards to Black cinema?
Oh, I don't know, just solving my existential dilemmas of living as a person, probably. I was always a reader and always like, I have like an intellectual writer type person. And I just kind of, just kept doing things that I liked. I don't think I thought about it as a job or as a career, as I certainly do now. But I think I just always, I liked writing and I liked reading, and and it was an area of safety and comfort and delight, And in college, I ended up majoring in English, and in there it was like a portal too, of discovery. Like that's how, over my lifetime, like that, this is how I've traveled. It accounts for how I've spent my time. It's helped to frame how I understand the world. It's a very deep part of who I am. Like, I'm not super identified with particular institutions or like, a career in that way. But, as you asked the question, I think it's just always been a part of my life to write and to think about things. And as I've grown as a person and moved through the profession, I've taken on different and varied capacities to deepen and complicate and expand that work.
It's nice. Awesome. So you wrote a book, your first book.
Woo!
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Congratulations. You wrote a book about Josephine Baker. Can you tell us who Josephine Baker is and why did you decide to write a book about her?
Well, did I decide or did I wander into it and then had to stick with it and make it happen? Well, Josephine Baker was was initially a vaudeville performer in the US. She was born in St. Louis, Missouri, and performed in the vaudeville circuit around the country, eventually ended up pausing in New York, where she was well known and appreciated as a comedic performer, I like to think of her as a comedic auteur. She was inventive and funny and really smart about her performance. And she, in 1925, she received an opportunity to perform in New York, and she took it and left. And that began a new kind of platform for her, where she was still very much that comedic vaudeville performer. She performed a lot of like well-known social dances, the Charleston and stuff like that. But she was now in this other context of a French or a Parisian fascination with Blackness, the other, the colonial, the primitive. And also, she was just in the music hall, which is just a wildly fantastical, strange place where there's comedy, often body comedy, dancing, juggling, just like circus and maybe motion pictures all together. So, so most people, I think, know Josephine Baker as that woman who went to Paris and got famous there and performed in the Bananas. And they also know her as maybe a glamorous celebrity, someone who was important to the civil rights movement. She did lots of work desegregating nightclubs in Miami Beach, for example, and other places that she performed in the 50s and early 60s. She addressed the March on Washington. And she adopted over a dozen children and had a vision of creating her home as a multicultural experiment in togetherness and in human unity. So she's, I think, known in this kind of broad way. And I became interested in a very specific part of her career, and that's her film career. Baker performed in 4 feature films and appears in a number of short films, including the famous Banana Dance, where she's dancing as the character Fatou at the Folies Bergère. And so I view Baker as the first international Black woman film star.
Dope. So how did you kind of fall into writing about her?
I had gone to Paris on a dissertation fellowship. I want to say it was called the George Lurcy Fellowship. And I was there to work on something else. I think I was doing an English literature PhD, so I'm sure it was something literarily oriented. And I just got distracted by people talking to me about Baker, just bringing her into conversation, seeing her image around the city. I think that there's a plaque for her, and I think I might have seen it, although now I might be mixing up different trips. But it was really just these weird moments where people were bringing her up to me, and I didn't really know a lot about her. And I might have even been a little bit skeptical of her as as someone who was caught up in the exotic Paris scene. And or maybe had succumbed to this exotic Paris scene in this like compromised way. And I just started watching her movies. At the same time, I was watching a lot of movies and really feeding my mind with the variety of different ways that I could see movies in Paris. I wasn't a super movie person at the time. And I was reading a lot. I was reading a lot of novels, and I was reading about, like all the bookstores had these great introductory books that you could buy about particular directors or movements of film, or, just kind of just little general knowledge books. So I was buying those. And I was just going to a lot of movies. So I was meeting Josephine Baker at the same time I was meeting film. And I just decided to change direction. I changed the direction of my dissertation, and I changed the direction of my studies. I made myself a film person when I returned to Chicago.
Gotcha. It sounds like she's had a long-lasting cultural significance in Paris, and I'm not so sure that she has that here in the States. I don't get that impression. I don't know if it's a matter of time, like when she was at her peak. This was like almost 100 years ago.
Yeah, that's right.
So do you feel like she still has cultural significance in the States here?
Yeah, she does. She comes up here and there, but in really significant ways. I mean, Beyonce performed as Josephine Baker back in 2006, which was Baker's centennial. Um, I guess maybe because I'm looking for it, there have been novels published that have been inspired by her story. There's an opera dedicated to Josephine Baker that was co-written by Julia Bullock. So she comes up where people are, I think, reflecting on what it means to be between cultures, or to be exotic, or to be to fulfill the self. But you're right that she's not, in some ways she is, even though in my book I argue that she's actually monumentally important to American culture, in that these 4 French films that she performs in, she's the lead. And Nina Mae McKinney's film Hallelujah is a couple years later than Siren of the Tropics. Evelyn Prier's work in Oscar Michaud's Within Our Gates is circulates within the race film circuit, and obviously internationally, since that's where the prints were eventually found decades later. But she has a unique significance as someone who operates in a space that is neither just Europe nor just the United States, but this global space that joins the two. This kind of Black Atlantic space emerges around her through her travels, through the types of characters that she portrayed, and how they were discussed, and who was excited about them, and what they did with that. You know what I mean?
Gotcha. Do you feel like she's bigger in Paris?
I mean, it's different. This is actually really interesting to explore. So she died in Paris. And when she died in Paris, she received, I don't know, something like a state funeral. I mean, people were out in the street following the casket and mourning her. She received that type of burial because of her work during the resistance. She married in France, and she created her family there. And one of the ways to think about her is really to think about her as a French entertainer. She sang in French, she performed, but on the other hand, part of what is allowing Josephine Baker to be Josephine Baker in France is the fact that she is American, and that she's Black American. So that remains important to her. Now, at the time, you're kind of making me think through some of the research. So in the 20s, well, like 20s, those 5 years between, when she debuts there in 1925, I think through the late 20s, there's quite a bit of coverage of her in the Black press. And a lot of it is very admiring, because she's successful and she's being seen as part of this broader landscape of Black success in Paris. Part of the utility of that is the vindication of Black talent in the US. Part of that is a strategic admiration that criticizes the United States, and Jim Crow here. She always said that the US was, that there wasn't a place for her here. And so she needed to be in Europe. But I do think she should have great significance here. And because she opens up all of these questions about an elsewhere and migration and identity, that just like broadens and plays with like what it means to be American, what it means to be Black, and what our relationship is to Black people from other places.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
What was the hardest part about writing this book?
Probably twofold. I think separating the figure of Baker from the living person of Baker, and just deciding what kind of book this was going to be. And then once I decided to focus on the figure of Baker, which is a decision I made really early on, like at the dissertation stage, but it was still kind of difficult. I didn't come to the decision to focus on, her movies until much later. And then when I did that, I started bringing a lot of questions for which the materials were either unconventional, absent, paradoxical in some way. It meant I had to try to understand how to think about her authorship and her authority through her performance in a context she wasn't entirely in control of. And that was just like a mind bender, twister for a while. And it still kind of is, because it's just a lot of, it's not a simple story, and I think I have a lot of different feelings about it too. Mm-hmm. But I ultimately decided to describe kind of moment by moment, piece by piece, what she seemed to be doing, and to just let it be complicated. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Are you referring to, you mentioned that there's double talk between her and the characters. Is that what you're referencing?
Yeah, that's part of it. So like she would say, there's always a little bit of myself in each character. So that's part of the double talk between her and her character. Another part of it is that the reason that these films are being made is that Josephine Baker is an internationally famous persona, and it's very specific. She is famous as an exotic, primitivist persona, this like dancing Black woman. She sings songs about coffee. She sings, you know what I mean? That's her world. So she's saying, well, there's a little bit of me in these characters, in the sense of these are women who have talent and who are discovered in the, like, across the plot of the movie. And then also the film is based on her persona, but the persona is being placed in a context of this like elaborate narrative, and she's speaking, singing, dancing, so the context is shifting, and she's doing different work. She is starring in the film, but in a lot of ways the film seems to be happening around her or bypassing her at times, and she doesn't really feel like the star. But then on the other hand, that's Josephine Baker. She's luminous. She's exciting to watch and to listen to. And she's the reason the films are being made and the reason that they're remembered. So you're just having to account for a number of different dynamics that are all happening at the same time, that are paradoxical, that are disturbing, that are beautiful and inspiring. She's funny, she's alluring, she's opaque, she's transparent. It's like all these different things. And to kind of talk about that and not have it just be a clutter, and not have it just be merely a set of contradictions, but actually a coherent complex, a prism over which she does, I think, ultimately exerts her authority.
Mm-hmm. Got you. Can you explain more in regards to her being, because I find that to be really fascinating, her being the star of the film, but I'm imagining because she's a Black woman, she's Black and she's a woman, that as you mentioned, they kind of undermine her. Can you explain more about around that?
Yeah. I wrote about this a little bit. I wrote about it in the book, but I also wrote about it in a short piece that I wrote for Salon this winter. And there I talked about it in a way that I didn't fully express in the book, which is that I always feel a kind of grief for the films Baker might have appeared in. In one of my first interviews, someone asked me, what movies do you think Baker would like to be in? And I didn't have an answer. And that really, it just kind of ate away at me. And then I started to reflect on the whole problem of being the romantic lead. And because I think that part of what's happening with Baker in her films is that off screen, she is a sexualized object. But as an actress, she's in films that are structured around white romance. And so she becomes like a vehicle for other people's connections while being disconnected and rejected, even. And so that's like the structural complexity. And it comes up in things like, when there's like a love interest, like a female love interest. I mean, there are a couple of things that happen, just sort of structurally. And one of them is that the woman sparkles, like there's light on her, or she's meant to be seen as a phenomenon of light. And this is accomplished through a sparkly dress or blonde hair, light white skin, lots of light being in the room. And even if it's a black dress, she's wearing a black dress, like it's the contrast with her skin. There's probably going to be elaborate jewelry. There's something for the eyes there. And the love interest, the male character, it's like almost like his entire job is just looking at her. And where he looks, the camera looks, and the audience looks. And you kind of, they kind of line up as the spotlight of desire. So, I resisted seeing it and I resisted thinking about it because I didn't want to care that much about whether Baker got the guy in her films. That just seemed sort of like, come on, she's Josephine Baker. She does what she wants, and there's more to life. But it is a really interesting dynamic to see this obviously luminous starring person get bypassed by the movie that she's making possible. I mean, that really, it took a while for me to both recognize that and understand it and be able to talk about it. And but I'm there now. and I'm just like appalled by it. But it's so important because it lets us think about how the question of whether Baker is a star or what she is about is really this pathway to understanding how stardom is a structure. It's about the allocation of resources. It's about how a scene is put together. It's not so much the talking. It's not how pretty she is or isn't, how desirable she is or isn't. All of those things are created. And they're created with light, with camera angles, with pacing, with characterization, costuming, all of those things. And so in a lot, like I'm just picturing in my mind right now, some of the sequences where she's singing and she appears to be by herself. There might be people listening to her, maybe even one character listening to her, but I don't know, she seems on her own. Whereas other characters, the scenes of other characters are motivated by what they are doing together or for each other, or some argument that they're having. And a lot of her films, she's the like fantasy object of some other character. and which is totally different from being desired, respected, just like wanted. And that, I mean, whatever. But see, by saying this, it's not like I'm elevating romantic comedy as some sort of, I don't know. I'm not elevating it to be like this is something, but it is fun and it's nice and it's sweet and it's a mechanism by which actresses become people that audiences remember and are connected to. And the same with, with male actors. Like, why is Tom Hanks in I don't know how many of these romantic comedies? I mean, because that's how you become a star that's a regular person that belongs in society. And of course, Baker's films are not American films. Tom Hanks's films are, American films. But I think that there's certain stories, that they in Elizabeth Ezra has a great book called The Colonial Unconscious. And one of the ways she talks about Baker's films is that these marriage plots are about creating that French working class family. And she's something that's happened. She represents something. Oh, I don't know if Ezra says this exactly, but she represents something that's happening around in the background of the formations of these families. But Baker wants to be part of it, right? Like she's in love with this guy, Jean or whatever. They're never special. They're never worthy of her. You know what I mean? Because she's like, well, at least in the movie, she looks tall. She's very elegant. She's still being Josephine Baker. And, and this guy is just like kind of a schlump of a guy that's very regular. And he's not doing anything original or creative or, spectacular in any way. He's just a kind of a regular guy. But he falls in love with her best friend. And Baker's character doesn't realize that that's happening. So there's something I think important there about, how these films both need her but exclude her persona. They use her labor and capitalize on it in this fully extractive way. And she talks about how she, in these later interviews in the 70s, well, she was late 60s, early 70s. She died in 75. That she didn't really like being in the movies. She found it cold, even though she liked her co-stars, and initially really was excited to be in the movies. But, I think her feelings about it are her own way of registering that it wasn't serving her. She wasn't being treated well.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a lot. And it makes me think what her contemporaries, like how they were being portrayed in film around that time.
Well, like you could think about Lena Horne. It's not as, not a direct contemporary, but because I don't know that there's another Josephine Baker starring in French films, but I think of Lena Horne, I think of Elizabeth Welsh, and they were singers. They were singers who had solid careers in that realm, but they appear in films that feature their performance, but their performances can also be removed because they're not central to the plot. So like on the poster, it'll say like, oh, Lena Horne, and I'm blanking on who else would, was in Stormy Weather and these other films. But she can be removed like this, for the censors. But another example contrasting would be like Nina Mae McKinney, who is great. And I wish there were just like 40 films of just Nina Mae McKinney. She stars in Hallelujah, King Vidor's film in 1929 as Chick, who is she's like a con artist and like a juke joint type of fast girl who's bad, and she ends up she has a sort of a is he a sugar daddy, a pimp? I don't know what he is, but she's kind of working with this one guy and tries to run a con on a naive um, lay preacher, and I think the two of them, but I think she ends up falling in love with him actually, if I remember correctly. But anyway, but she's amazing, and she got a deal in Hollywood and was going to appear in a bunch of different films. And I don't know a ton about her career. I know I heard that they found her difficult to work with, and whenever I hear that a Black woman was difficult to work with, I mean, what, she had dignity, a voice, a plan, a vision,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah. Especially at that time.
yeah, especially at that time. So I don't so I just figure, yeah, she was awesome. She was just as amazing as she seems to be in the work that she did in Hallelujah. She does perform in other films with Paul Robeson. She's in a great movie that I really like that was filmed in Jamaica called The Devil's Daughter. I really like the bass in her voice and how tall she seems. And so I think she and Baker, there's a dialogue there, on opposite sides of the Atlantic that could be, super interesting to have. Yeah.
There's your second book. You're welcome.
I knew coming on this podcast would be a wonderful, generative experience.
So you wrote that her film career brought hope to the Black press. What would you say her strategy was, or did she have a strategy?
Do you mean relative to the press or?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think she and her manager, what was his last name? Abatino. I think the two of them, their goal was publicizing Josephine Baker and creating her career. But the Black press was interested in her success. They were interested, sometimes I feel like a couple of stories were actually reported from Paris. So they were also experiencing what was different there. People were just like tracking this phenomenon of Black success, the musicians, the other artists, the writers, and the performers, dancers like Baker, who were working and creating a community there and making people proud. Michelle Fabre writes about it as that they were a kind of site of recognition, a site of recognition for African Americans. I don't know that was specifically her strategy. I think her strategy was, I want to be Josephine Baker. I want to perform. I want publicity. I want to manipulate the press. She did a hoax where she claimed that she was getting married to a count, like a kind of not low, but just like let's call it an accessible level of royalty. And some of the journalists, they just followed the story. They just, accepted the story and pursued the story. And there was not a lot, but there was a significant discussion about the significance of this Black woman, colored girl, Negro girl marrying a European, into marrying a count. But they found that it wasn't true, it wasn't happening, and she just kind of laughed it off as a hoax. She was just like any young person who's suddenly adopted by the public, who's just kind of playful, manipulative, savvy, all of those things.
You mentioned that you hope that your writing about her would feel like a duet between yourself and Josephine Baker. Were there any like ideals or perceptions that you had to unlearn through the process of writing this book?
Yes. I had to put her first and trust her actions, words, and performance rather than frame her with my pre-existing ideas about her. I mean, I was a literary person. I wasn't that knowledgeable or interested in performance as such, or cinema. And Baker, there's this new book by Hanif Abdurraqib called A Little Devil in America. And he talks about performance as a tightrope. And I think that people like Baker and performers in general walk that tightrope between liberation and exploitation. I almost said exploration, and I think that that's part of it too. That it took me a long time to see her as a young woman having an adventure who captivates the public and is also captivated by the public. I didn't understand that initially. It took a while for me to see that and to just appreciate the delicacy of that dynamic, and that a number of things can be true at the same time. And I think trusting the erotic as a space of both care and discare, as a space of respect and expression and excitement, and just seeing what she's doing and not looking at her just through my own distrust of primitivism or exoticism as a whole. What Hanif says in his book was, I really enjoyed writing about these Black performers because I removed the specter of cultural appropriation. And I think probably it's the last maybe 5 or even 3 years of writing the book. I just decided to frame her with Blackness and with people who could see her in a way that was illuminating to me. And that's why I ended up turning to the Black press. Once I started looking at the Defender and the Baltimore Afro-American, etc., that's where I saw that even before Baker left for Paris, she was admired, known, loved. She was recognized as a comedian, and that she enjoyed herself as a comedian, that she had a career that she was working on. She's not merely a representation or a stereotype. And from that vantage point, seeing her as someone who had made a series of decisions that placed her at a point where she would be invited to go to Paris to perform in this review, and then that she was able to capitalize on it. And then she was able to capitalize on that and continue to change, and created this singing career for herself, and this appear in films and then stop appearing in films and return to the stage, and then create this unusual family, and then show up at the March on Washington in her military outfit. Do you know what I mean? It's just like that. Once I just sort of shifted that lens, and just like the cultural appropriation, these sort of ignorant white colonial Europe, whatever it is that's going on there, I think that story has been told, and I am not the one to go back into it. At the same time, there are these really interesting, like white authored productions, like Nancy Cunard's book, this big anthology Negro that has Zora Neale Hurston and other people in it. Primitivism in Paris in the 20s is just it's kind of like our time now. It's just wild. There's a lot of stuff that is really fascinating and important. It's creating a space for Black expression to manifest, and it's also, I don't know, it's also just a lot of things you need to scroll by, delete, rail against, all of these things. It's because it's there's theft, there is mimicry, there is undermining, there is disappointment in representation. Then there's just like the failures of even Black authorship and the complications of what that even is. And it's just a real I mean, it's just life. It's very hard to be true and to be right and all of those things. So I guess the duet is about, as an author and as the author of Baker's film history, to just like be on her side and to harmonize with her and to understand, to just be at least someone who would value what she did and try to account for it. um I was always worried about being too celebratory and too naive, like in graduate school and stuff. But I don't know. I'm not afraid of that anymore. I want to be enthusiastic about my interests and to like loving her. You know what I mean? And just being delighted by her and trusting her. A lot of it came through listening to interviews of Baker as an older woman, someone closer to my own age now, and understanding what that is to be in your late 40s and 50s, and to look at yourself when you were 19 and 20 and to just marvel at what happened to you. Because at that point, you know, it is happening to her. She doesn't speak French. She doesn't, you know, she takes a job and she comes to this place and these people go wild for her. And she's in her body looking out at that, you know, in the audience. And so I think I came to understand that she, like me, was a spectator of her career also. And so my duet is in part with this, you know, this later Baker. And, you know, we're looking at this younger woman, you know, like you would do, with compassion, with curiosity. You're trying not to say I told you so. You know, do you know what I mean? With some appreciation for what you're able to do when you're that young and all that you don't know yet. And you take all these really big risks, and all these possibilities are unfolding. It's really beautiful.
Do you know why she stopped acting in films?
Oh, well, I know she didn't, you know, super enjoy those experiences. But it could be that the films weren't all that successful. The first film, you know, Siren of the Tropics, played in the US and circulated with race films, and the press, I mean, I'm speaking of the Black press, they appreciated that it was Josephine Baker and that she was famous and important and glamorous and provided an idea of what a Black Hollywood could be. But they were really critical. When I say they, I'm not talking about hundreds of reviews, and, you know, but the few that there were, they were super critical of the plots that she was in and the kind of acting she was doing. It seemed like she was overacting, and also like just like being too subservient to the, you know, this white love interest that she had in the film. And so that film, Siren of the Tropics, in that sense, I think it wasn't that successful in the US. And then Zuzu and Princess Tam Tam showed in the US much later than their production years. What I wonder about that is whether the venues for showing these films existed, because they are French films. You know what I mean? Like, I mean, even now, like, you know, most people don't want to read subtitles, and they would have had to read subtitles because she's speaking French for the whole time in these films. And so I don't know, I wonder, was there some ambivalence about that? But the films, there's not a lot of coverage of those films. And then the last one, I think, barely crossed the Atlantic. And like I said, she said she didn't, you know, enjoy being in movies. She was much more successful as a live performer, and I think more attuned to that herself. Yeah.
Book that you wrote, who is it for?
Who is it for?
Yeah.
I'm hesitating amongst a whole list of words that are like passing through my mind right now. I mean, the book is, a lot of it is this conversation in my mind between me and the imagined Josephine Baker. The other, it's for film scholars and filmmakers who are kind of engaged with Black film, at the Black film study, to just have an idea that this figure, even though she was in French productions, is still significant to film production in the United States because she was African American, and that we need to expand how we think about the Blackness of Black film. And maybe when we start doing that, we'll see some other activity, around, have a more global sense of Black film. It's a book that, as a professor and as a scholar in a university, I have to produce a book for tenure and promotion. So some of it is practical. I need to create a book and publish it, at respectable press. It's published by Indiana University Press. Sometimes I think her fans, I don't know, I feel like they might not love it because it's not so much about her life. And so, I don't have new little tidbits and anecdotes about her. It's really just like a thinking through her films and very close visual analysis of her films. So it's sort of like it's a pretty academic book. But I did, in writing it, I did think a lot about my students, especially like Black women students, and the kinds of questions they would ask me, or that I would see them pursuing. Maybe they weren't bringing them to me in particular, but just pursuing as they thought about their own creativity and performance, how they are exoticized by other people, or and what they felt about that. Like sometimes they're excited about it, sometimes not. And you know what I mean? They're just kind of figuring out the world and their place in it. And they're also trying to figure out how to navigate or negotiate creativity within complexes that weren't made for them, or that seem necessary but not like encouraging of creativity or of their voices. And so I feel like Josephine Baker is a light there. In writing the book, I certainly talked a lot to, and would love to feel read by people that I admire, like, Black women artists who are interested in our creativity and luminescence, and just like protecting that and enjoying that, while obviously we live with hostile conditions.
Also want to add that this book is for the Black film space community, so go out and purchase it right now.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it is. I love to hear more about Black film space community, because I know there's Black filmmakers, and I always feel like sometimes the people who, as you said, like Baker is from 100 years ago, like 100 years before us. And I think of her as an innovator of the early 20th century. And I think of us as innovators of the early 21st century. We're facing very similar dynamics with this horrid fucking COVID, as they were facing the flu. We're facing shifts in technology. There's a deep need for creativity, for experimenting with life and figuring out what we are going to do here to survive and to live and to be creative. And we see those people as having, like, their success means that they knew what they were doing, but their success comes from their experimentation and from taking on the adventure of everyday life. And that's us also in our space, a Black film space, Black creative space.
Yeah. No, that absolutely.
Yeah. I don't know. What do you think?
Regard, like, what exactly?
Like, do you how are you seeing this moment in terms of creativity? Are you moving through it with your creativity? Are you feeling like it's sort of pushing back on it, or how are you sort of experiencing this moment?
I mean, I'm experiencing a lot of uncertainty. Um,
Mm-hmm.
you know, uncertainty is one, in order to function as an adult or as a human, you
Mm.
have to either be completely ignorant to the idea of uncertainty or be able to really be at peace with it. But the
Mm.
pandemic has made it, you know, very real. And yeah, I mean, as far as like how that pertains to my personal creative endeavors, I guess it gives me a sense of urgency to create, because the
Mm.
older I'm getting and the more I'm realizing how uncertain life is, I feel more mortal than I've ever felt. Like, I think when I was much younger, I just never really thought about death.
Yeah.
And now I think about it I think about it a fair amount.
Yeah, sure. Same.
And I think, you know, if I were to die or, you know, become terminally ill, what am I leaving behind? Um, so I think
Yes.
about that often.
That's what I was
Yeah.
that's what I was thinking about this time last year. You know, doing the copy edits on this book, getting the proofs. I wanted to live and I
Yeah.
wanted to leave something behind. I was here and I'm going to tell this person's story, this odd, this odd figure
Hmm.
from the past. Um, but it helped me to mark the time because that was when I got the copy edits. I think it was like those early lockdown type days,
Hmm.
and it helped to kind of mark the time and to imagine, something beyond that particular moment and the danger and the uncertainty and the exhaustion and confusion. I mean, the book had its own uncertainty,
Mm.
exhaustion,
Hmm.
and confusion.
As do most projects. Yeah.
Yeah, they're really, it was really difficult. But I was laser focused on it.
Mm.
And I love it for that reason that it gave me a kind of direction and sanity at a difficult time.
How long did it take for you to write it?
Man, that is a complex question. There is a distant version of this that is my
Mm.
dissertation. And I completed my dissertation in 2004. So that's a long time ago.
Mm.
I attempted several versions of the book over the years. I published short articles. Well, maybe not that short, but I published articles about Baker, book chapters in other people's books. But the version that we are talking about, I think, came together in I want to say it was
Mm.
2017. And then 2018, I sent it into the press. Was it 2018 or the fall of 2017? Anyway, and I got readers' reports back that spring, addressed those, another read, another peer review, I think. And then it must have been, I don't know, fall of 2019. I'm just trying to remember the big milestones. Like, I know my body remembers. It was like, it always felt like such a big deal to go through a round of revisions and send it in. But it took a lot, because I was teaching at the same time, and then I took on the work at the Black Film Center archive, which I decided to make very sort of this vivacious space of programming, bringing in visiting filmmakers and creating exhibitions and um, blogging, and you know what I mean. It was just like I was doing
Mm.
too many things. Um, yeah, I guess I remember December was there was a new editor, and she just said, you know, this is the production schedule. If you can get me this manuscript, I need to have it in order to make your book a book. Something along those lines. And yeah, I think it was like December of 2019, I guess. And then a few months later, copy edit and proofs. And I enjoyed, in a sense, I enjoyed every stage. But the last stage was the best because I felt that I had done the best that I could do with, you know, with what I knew at the time. And I remember really trying to make sure that I had done right by this figure that I had come to know and respect and value. And that was the other thing too. I think I really those were the feelings I wanted to have about my subject. I didn't want to write about something I didn't like or that I was criticizing, you know, like writing an entire book about like what's wrong with, I don't know. I just,
that doesn't sound fun.
No, it's not, you know, that's just not like how I want to live. So I think it was, you know, you asked me earlier what was the hardest part. And I think the other really hard part, other than the conceptual work of understanding Baker's cinematic prism, deciding to use those words and, you know, being able to explain them somewhat to people or, you know, somewhat in the book. I think it was really forming my own authorship and kind of, you know, reckoning with, embracing, understanding, enjoying the writing process and trusting my own identity as an author and as a writer. You know, that wasn't, I think the pressures of like the university requirement of a book for tenure and promotion and just, I don't know, just all the things. It just, that person, the way that I got into this or wandered into it as somebody who really, I just liked writing and I like pretty things and I like imagination, expressing myself, like that whole world, was, you know, there was a long process of separation from that. Now I appreciate it as a period of questioning, exploration, and learning, but it just seemed really not great to experience. And so I think that was the hardest, just kind of becoming a writer and letting that be what I want and just doing it.
Yeah, I like how you speak about kind of like trusting your voice and your instincts. And you know, this interview is about essentially about your book and Josephine Baker, but I also think, you know, a lot of people in our community are screenwriters, and it's important to, you know, trust yourself, because there will be a lot of noise. It's something I'm experiencing now with my own work, is just trusting through all the noise.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I love like being edited. I trust my editors. I don't usually have a lot of resistance to what they are doing on my manuscripts, whatever it is, a book, an essay, whatever. But I have my inner critics. You have your inner critics who are ferocious. They just know all this stuff about you in your own mind. And to be able to know yourself and your own voice, to trust it, to say, this is what I think. I made this, and go forward with that it is such a wonderful feeling. When I look at this book, I don't have any anxiety or weirdness about it at all. I really love it. Even though I barely remember what's in it. But, it's been a long time since I really sat down and read it. It's really funny. Like someone will read something to me, like, oh yes, that is very interesting.
Who wrote that? Oh, yeah, that's right.
Right, yeah, my name is on it. It must be me. But it's funny how things kind of fade out of your mind, and they mean different things. Like one thing I didn't count on was that I would be different on the other side of it. And so I would see things differently. And then, of course, when people with other readers, they are putting it into their context of what they know and what they care about, so it all becomes different again, which is really exciting and fun and beautiful.
Where can people watch Josephine Baker's films without going to YouTube?
Oh, without going to YouTube. I mean, I'm going to do an event on her birthday. If people want to come to that on June 3rd through Indiana University Cinema, and people can register for the conversation that I'm going to have that evening, June 3rd at 7, with, although I don't know, maybe I'm not sure when this is coming out, so maybe I shouldn't time it, but I think they're going, the Kino International is going to reissue Princess Tam Tam and Zuzu. Mm-hmm. And so I'm hoping eventually they will put these films back on all the streaming sources that we've all been using. Mm-hmm. But there might also be these events. I'm going to do one in June. The Wexner Center for the Arts at Ohio State University is also doing a Josephine Baker screening centered on her silent film, Siren of the Tropics.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah, but right now they're removed, and I'm hoping that they'll be reissued very soon.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, hopefully. And where can people find your book?
Wherever books are sold. You can go directly to the Indiana University Press. There's Bookshop, wherever books are. Okay. You'll find Josephine Baker's Cinematic Prism. Mm-hmm.
Awesome. And is there anything else that you want to say before we let you go?
Oh, no. I enjoyed the conversation very much.
Likewise.
And you brought me it just brought back things to mind that I hadn't thought about in a long time, including just the actual process of writing this book, which I think in turn probably helped me to appreciate Baker's own work ethic and her determination to be good at what she was doing.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Terri, for joining us on the Black Film Space podcast. This was awesome. I know the name Josephine Baker, but I don't really know much about her. So this was insightful for me. And this is just dope. So thank you so much.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you very much for having me.
All right.